Remember Bebé? Imagine being an orphan in Portugal, not playing on any 11-a-side teams until you're 16, and within a few years, you've been signed by one of the biggest football clubs in the world, and you've done this while still being an unknown player in your own country. Hey there, I'm Adrian from Rabona TV, and I was thinking about wonder kids whose careers never really panned out the other day, and then I got thinking about Bebé, one of the biggest quandaries in football, really. He was never really a wonder kid. He was an unknown quantity that surprised the world when United announced his signing, and unfortunately for him, at this point, he's gone back to being an unknown. Let's go back and see how he went from the streets of Lisbon to Old Trafford and where his incredibly strange story has led him to in present day. Bebé, known legally as Tiago Manuel Dias Correia, was born on the 12th of July 1990 in Agualva Cacém, Portugal, a smaller city in the municipality of Sintra. If you've ever taken the train from Lisbon to Sintra, then you would have passed right through it. Bebé's parents were immigrants from Cape Verde, and unfortunately, they abandoned him and his older brother at a young age. By the way, it was his brother who gave him the nickname Bebé, meaning baby, of course. Thankfully for the two boys, their grandmother took them in and began looking after them as well as she could manage, but eventually they were placed into the care of a local church, and at the age of 12, he was sent to Casa do Gaiato, a shelter or orphanage for youngsters. Here he would go through his daily routine of prayer, school, and of course, playing football in the dusty courtyard. From 12 until 16, Bebé only ever played football with his friends until he and a few other boys from Casa do Gaiato were invited to play with CAIS, a company associated with Portugal's Homeless World Cup team. In fact, in 2009, Bebé played in the European competition for the homeless in Bosnia, in which he was the top scorer for Portugal, according to Sapo. Following his time with CAIS, he was spotted by Estrela da Amadora, a club in the 3rd division of Portuguese football at the time, and still is in the 3rd division to this day. Prior to that, he also played with amateur side Lourdes, but it was with Estrela that he began making his mark. Well, I say that in relative terms, of course. It's where the ball got rolling for him, I should say. After a decent season with Amadora, in which he scored 4 goals from 26 matches, Bebé went on strike 5 matches before the end of the season due to the club's inability to pay his wages. At this time, Bebé was making €300 per week. In fact, for much of the season, Bebé was the only player that was getting paid, but once the money stopped rolling in for him as well, he left, and Amadora lost every match that followed. Luckily for him, Bebé was picked up by Primeira Liga side Vitoria Guimaraes at the end of the 2009-10 season. In fact, that May, he was offered to PSV Eindhoven by his agent for free, but they turned him down because they knew absolutely nothing about him. It's fair to say that Guimarães are one of the stronger sides outside of the big 3 in Portugal, so it was a great move for him, even though he didn't want to leave Casa do Gaiato. That's down near Lisbon. Vitoria de Guimarães is up in the north. But given that Bebé wasn't being paid his wages by Amadora, that made his buyout clause void, so Guimarães got him for free. Unfortunate for Amadora, as the €1 million would have done a lot for their financial situation. After linking up with Guimarães for preseason, Bebé played in a few friendlies with the club, and they adjusted his former €3 million release clause to €9 million. Then, just 5 weeks after signing on with Guimarães, it was announced that Manchester United had triggered his new €9 million release clause. So, hang on, just wait a second. Let's go over this. A kid who was living on the streets at one point, then with his grandmother, and then in a homeless shelter / orphanage, was picked up by a 3rd division side that had to sell all of their gym equipment due to their financial situation at one point, couldn't pay any of their players but Bebé, and was inevitably unable to pay his wages at the end of the season. He's then picked up by a Primeira Liga side on a free transfer, plays in a couple of preseason friendlies, and then is signed by one of the biggest clubs in the world just 5 weeks later? How? How does this happen? Well, Sir Alex Ferguson later admitted that he had opted to sign Bebé despite never actually seeing him play himself. Typically, Ferguson's signing process was a little more stringent, allegedly at times even grilling former teammates and family members of potential signings to see what kind of person is behind the talented player. But with Bebé, Ferguson trusted the word of his former assistant and then manager of the Portuguese national team, Carlos Queiroz, as well as United's scout over in Portugal. Queiroz likely would have seen Bebé due to the relatively unknown striker having been called up to Portugal's under-19 squad at one point. United scout, on the other hand, the man who helped them in finding Ronaldo, Nani, and Anderson, also had the trust of the United manager. As Ferguson himself said regarding Bebé, quote, "He's raw material, but we can work with that. It's a fairy tale when you read about his background. When we identify someone with potential, we normally assess that over a period of time. But we have a good scout in Portugal, and he's very bright. He's got a tremendous instinct about the boy, and other clubs were starting to hover over the boy, so we made a quick decision. Sometimes you have to work on an impulse, and we're good at developing young players." An impulse buy for sure, but something strikes me as a bit interesting here. Ferguson says that other big clubs were hovering around Bebé, and many reports that I could find mentioned the same three teams: Benfica, United, and Real Madrid. Again, looking at his trajectory from an orphanage to United, it's a shockingly fast climb to the top of the football pyramid, so how could this happen? Let's go deeper. After leaving Amadora, Bebé also left his former agent Gonçalo Reis, and was snapped up by none other than, yes, you guessed it, Jorge Mendes, one of, if not the foremost football agents in the game. After getting him a move to Vitoria Guimaraes, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Mendes was the one behind the hyping up of Bebé, this unknown quantity. Never underestimate what a good PR campaign can do. And with Mendes having recently moved both Cristiano Ronaldo and José Mourinho to Real Madrid, not to mention all of his other clients as he continued to push himself to the top of the super agent rankings, trust in him and his recommendations would have been growing to an all-time high at this point. And the icing on the cake of my suspicion is that it was later revealed that the 9 million euros that United paid to Vitoria Guimaraes was actually 5.5 million to the club and 3.5 to Mendes in agent fees. A quick payday thanks to some hype, whether it was deserved or not, that remained to be seen. Well, as I'm sure you could have guessed by now, the hype was unfounded. Here you had Bebé's former agent Gonçalo Reis still bitter about missing out on a cut of Bebé's transfer to United, yet still saying, quote, "He will not be as good as Ronaldo, but will be better than Nani, somewhere in between. But he will be humble and he will learn. He will be like a little boy with Ferguson. He will just wait for the orders, then, one day, he will explode on the field." Somewhere between Nani and Ronaldo is a fantastic player. Somewhere between Nani and Ronaldo would have made Bebé a star at Old Trafford and an extremely important player for the Portuguese national team. But unfortunately for him, it's now clear that his ability was completely overrated. And I don't mean to rag on the guy. It's no fault of his own that agents and talent scouts saw him to be more of a football player than he really was. Just as you can't blame him for some of the discipline problems he's had throughout the years while he was away from United. I mean, in the little time he was actually in Manchester, he rented from Sir Alex Ferguson himself. There was no point in him buying a house after he was constantly sent on loan, and perhaps Fergie wanted to, keep an eye on him. First, he was sent to Besiktas, where he was banished from the squad due to his inability to respect the team curfew. Not a great start. Then, he was sent back to Portugal to play for Rio Ave on loan. He scored twice from 19 appearances. Then finally, his most successful spell at Paços de Ferreira in Portugal once again, where he hit double digits in goals, again on loan. His third since joining United. From there, Benfica rolled the dice on him, but Jorge Jesus handed him half a dozen appearances before Benfica loaned him out a few times. It seemed like wherever he went, besides Paços de Ferreira, he struggled. It looks as if he's found his level though, as he's in his second stint with the recently relegated Rayo Vallecano, who now compete in the Segunda División in Spain. So in conclusion, let's be fair here. As I alluded to, you can't blame Bebé for being overhyped. That's on his agent and talent scouts in Portugal. It comes down to what their perception of his skill was. Not only that, but to assume that anyone would be able to handle going from preseason friendlies with Vitoria Guimaraes to making £12,000 per week in Manchester is asking a lot of somebody. Especially when you look at it through the lens of somebody who went from living in an orphanage and not playing organized football until he was 16 and not having the money to afford boots, to training at Carrington a few years later, despite never setting his own country's league alight and being an unknown to those in Portugal. But damn it if it isn't an amazing story to look back on. I mean, the guy won the Premier League. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to revisit some other characters from football's past, whether they be overhyped players, managers that disappeared, etc., be sure to let me know in the comments. Other than that, I thank you for watching. My name's Adrian, this is Rabona TV, and have a great day. Later!